Continuing where I left off, Chapter 9. The little princess lay supported by pillows, with a white cap on her head. The pains had just left her. Black locks of her hair curled around her inflamed, perspiring cheeks. Her charming, rosy little mouth with its downy lip was open, and she was smiling joyfully. Prince Andrei entered the room and paused, facing her at the foot of the sofa on which she was lying. Her glittering eyes, filled with childlike fear and excitement, rested on him without changing their expression. "I love you all, and have done no one any harm. So why am I suffering? Help me," they seemed to say. She saw her husband without realizing the significance of his appearance now before her. Prince Andrei went around to the side of the sofa and kissed her on the forehead. "My darling," he said, a word he had never used to her before. "God is merciful." She looked at him inquiringly and with childish reproach. "I expected help from you, and I got none. None, not even from you," she said, her eyes. She was not surprised at his arrival. She did not realize that he had come. His coming had nothing to do with her agony or with its relief. The pains began again, and Marya Bogdanovna advised Prince Andrei to leave the room. The doctor came in. Prince Andrei left the room, and meeting Princess Marya, joined her again. They talked in whispers, but kept breaking off, waiting and listening. "Go, my dear," said Prince Marya. Prince Andrei went back to his wife and sat waiting in the room next to hers. A woman came out of the bedroom with a frightened look on her face and was confused when she saw Prince Andrei. He covered his face with his hands and remained so for several minutes. Pious, helpless, animal moans came from the next room. Prince Andrei got up, went to the door, and tried to open it. Someone was holding it shut. "You can't come in, you can't," said a terrified voice from within. He began to pace the room. The cries ceased. Several seconds passed. Then all at once a fearful shriek. It could not be she could not scream like that, came from the bedroom. Prince Andrei rushed to the door. The scream died away, and he heard the wail of an infant. Why have they taken a baby in there? Prince Andrei wondered at the moment. A baby? What baby? Or was the baby born? When he suddenly realized all the joyful significance of that wail, tears choked him, and leaning both elbow on the window, still he began to cry, sobbing like a child. The door opened. The doctor came out of the room, with his short sleeves rolled up and without a coat. He was pale and his jaw was trembling. Prince Andrei turned to him, but the doctor gave him a distracted glance and passed by without a word. A woman rushed out and, seeing Prince Andrei, stopped, hesitating on the threshold. Prince Andrei went into his wife's room. She was dead, lying in the same position he had seen her in a few minutes earlier, and despite the fixed eyes and the pallor of her cheeks, there was the same expression on her charming, timid, childlike little face with its downy upper lip. "I love you all, and have done no one any harm. And what have you done to me?" said the charming, pious, lifeless face. In a corner of the room, something tiny and red grunted and squealed in Marya Bogdanovna's trembling white hands. 2 hours later, Prince Andrei quietly entered his father's study. The old man already knew everything. He was standing near the door, and as soon as he opened, his stiff old arms closed like a vice around his son's neck, and without a word he began to sob like a child. 3 days later, the little princess was buried. Prince Andrei went up to the steps to the side of the bier to take his last farewell of her. Even in the coffin, though her eyes were closed, her face was the same. "Ah, what have you done to me?" it still said, and Prince Andrei felt that his soul was rent, that he was guilty of a wrong he could neither rectify nor forget. He could not weep. The old man also came, and kissed one of the little waxen hands, and lay peacefully crossed on her breast, and to her face said, "Ah, what have you done to me? Why?" And the old man turned away angrily at the sight of that face. Another 5 days passed. Even the young Prince Nikolai Androvich was christened. The wet nurse held the coverlet with her chin, while the priest anointed the baby's little red, wrinkled palms and soles with a goose feather. The godfather who was his grandfather, trembling with fear that he might drop the infant, carried him around the batter tin front and handed him over to the godmother, Princess Marya. Prince Andrei, faint with fear lest the baby should be drowned in the front, sat in the adjoining room waiting for the sacrament to end. He looked up joyfully at the baby when the nurse brought it to him, and nodded approvingly when she told him that the bit of wax with the baby's hair had floated and not sunk when cast into the font. Chapter 10. Rostov's part in the duel between Dolokhov and Besukov was hushed up by the efforts of the old count, and instead of being reduced to the ranks as he expected, he was appointed adjutant to the Governor-General of Moscow. As a consequence, he could not go to the country with the rest of the family, but was kept in Moscow all summer by his new duties. Dolokhov recovered, and during his convalescence, Rostov became extremely friendly with him. He laid ill at the home of his mother, who was passionately and tenderly devoted to him. Old Marya Ivanovna had grown fond of Rostov because of his friendship for her Fedya, and often talked to him about her son. "Yes, Count," she would say, "he is too noble, too pure in heart, for the corrupt society of our day. No one cares about virtue any more. It's a reproach to everyone. Now, tell me, Count, was it right, was it honorable of Besukov, and how Fedya, in his noble-hearted way, loved him, and even now never says a word against him? All those pranks in Petersburg, and that trick they played on the policeman, they were in it together, weren't they? Yet Besukov got off scot-free, while Fedya took all the blame on his shoulders. And what he has to go through. True, he has been reinstated, but how could they not reinstate him? I don't suppose there were many such brave sons of the fatherland out there. And now, this duel. Have those people no feeling, no honor? Knowing him to be an only son, to challenge him to a duel and then shoot straight at him like that? What we can be thankful that God had mercy on us. And what was it for? Why, who doesn't have intrigues nowadays? And if he was so jealous, well, as I see things, then he ought to have shown it sooner, instead of letting it go on for a year. And to challenge him, reckoning on Fenya's refusing to fight him because he owes him money. How base, how ignominious. I know you understand Fedya, my dear Count, and that is why I love you with all my heart, believe me. Not many people understand him. He is such a lofty, angelic soul. Dolokhov himself, during his convalescences, often talked to Rostov in a way that no one would have expected of him. People consider me a bad man. I know, he said. Let them. I don't care about anyone but those I love. But when I love anyone, I give my life for him. The rest I'll strangle if they stand in my way. I have an adored, a precious mother, and 2 or 3 friends, you among them, and as for the rest, I pay attention to them only insofar as they are useful or harmful to me, and most of them are harmful, especially the women. Yes, my dear friend, he continued, I have met loving, noble, high-minded men, but I have yet to meet a woman. But she, countess or cook, is not venal. I have never yet found that angelic purity and devotion that I seek in a woman. If I were to find such a woman, I would give my life for her. But those, he made a gesture of contempt, and believe me, if I still value life, it is only because I still hope to meet such a divine creature who would regenerate, purify, and elevate me. But you don't understand this. Oh yes, I understand it perfectly, answered Rostov, who was very much under the influence of his new friend. In the autumn of Rostov's return to Moscow, early in the winter, Denisov also came back and stayed with him. The first part of the winter of 1806, which Nikolai Rostov spent in Moscow, was one of the happiest, gayest periods for him and the whole family. Nikolai brought a great many young men to his parents' house. Vera was a handsome girl of 20. Sonia, at 16, had all the charm of an opening flower. Natasha, half child, half young lady, was at one moment childishly droll, at the next girlishly enchanting. Love was in the air in the Rostovs' house at the time, as commonly happens in homes where there are very young and very charming girls. Every young man who came to the house and saw those impressionable smiling young faces, smiling no doubt at their own happiness, their lively bustle, and heard the spontaneous burst of music and song, and the inconsequent but friendly chatter of young girls ready for anything and full of hope, experienced those feelings of readiness to fall in love and the expectation of happiness that the young Rostovs themselves were feeling. Among the young men introduced by Rostov, one of the first was Dolokhov, who was liked by everyone in the house, except Natasha. She almost quarreled with her brother about him. She insisted that he was a bad man, that in the duel with Besakov Pierre was right and Dolokhov was wrong, and that he was disagreeable and unnatural. "There's nothing for me to understand," she cried with self-will obstinate. "He's wicked and heartless. Now you know I like your Denisov, though he is a rake and all that. Still I like him, so you see I do understand. I don't know how to put it. With him everything is calculated, and I don't like that. But Denisov—" "Oh, Denisov's another matter," said Rostov, implying that even Denisov was nothing compared to Dolokhov. "You have to understand what a soul that Dolokhov has. You should see him with his mother. What a heart!" "Well, I don't know anything about that, but he makes me uncomfortable, and he's fallen in love with Sonia." "Did you know that?" "What nonsense!" "I'm certain of it. You'll see." Natasha proved to be right. Dolokhov, who did not as a rule care for the society of ladies, became a frequent visitor to the house, and the question whose sake he came for, though no one spoke of it, was soon settled. He came to see Sonia, and Sonia, who would never have dared to say so, knew why he came and blushed crimson every time he appeared. Dolokhov often dined at the Rostovs, never missed a performance at which they were present, and went to Vogel's balls for young people, which the Rostovs always attended. He paid marked attention to Sonia and looked at her in such a way that not only could she not bear his glance without turning scarlet, but both the old countess and Natasha blushed when they saw that look. It was clear that this strong, strange man was irresistibly attracted to the dark, graceful young girl who was in love with another. Rostov noticed something new between Dolokhov and Sonia, but he could not determine just what these new revelations were. "They are always in love with someone," he said to himself, thinking of Natasha and Sonia. But he was no longer at ease with Dolokhov and Sonia, and he began to be less often at home. In the autumn of 1806, everybody had again begun talking of the war with Napoleon, and with even greater fervor than the preceding year. It was decreed that not only were 10 men in every 1,000 to be recruited for the regular army, but 9 in every 1,000 for the militia. Everywhere Bonaparte was anathematized, for nothing was talked of in Moscow but the impending war. For the Rostov family, the whole interest in these preparations for the war lay in the fact that Nikolosha would not hear of remaining in Moscow and was only waiting for the end of Denisov's leave to rejoin the regiment with him after Christmas. His approaching departure, far from preventing him from enjoying himself, gave an added zest to his pleasures. He spent the greater part of his time away from home, at dinners, parties, and balls. Chapter 11. On the 3rd day of Christmas holidays, Nikolai dined at home, which he had rarely done of late. It was a grand farewell dinner, as he and Denisov were leaving to join their regiments after Epiphany. About 20 people were present, including Dolokhov and Denisov. Never had love been so much in the air. Never had the amorous atmosphere made itself so strongly felt in the Rostovs' house as during those holidays. "Seize the moment of happiness," it said. "Love and be loved. That is all that is real in the world. All else is folly. It is the one thing we are interested in here." After exhausting 2 pairs of horses as usual, without having visited all the places he should have gone to or to which he had been invited, Nikolai returned home just before dinner. As soon as he came in, he noticed and felt the tension of the amorous atmosphere in the house, and was conscious too of a curious embarrassment among the company. Sonia, Dolokhov, and the old countess seemed particularly disturbed, to a lesser degree Natasha. Nikolai perceived that something must have happened between Sonia and Dolokhov before dinner, and with his instinctive tact was very gentle and worried with them both at dinner. That evening there was to be one of the balls that Vogel, the dancing master, gave for his pupils during the holidays. Nikolenko, are you coming to Vogue's? Please do, said Natasha. He asked you especially, and Vasily Dmitrievich, this was Denisov is coming. Where would I not go at the young count's command, said Denisov, who had justly assumed the role of Natasha's knight. I am quite ready to dance the Pas de la Chaleur. If I had time, answered Nikolai. But I promised the Arkovals. They're giving a party. What about you? He turned to Dolokhov. As soon as he had spoken, he saw that the question should not have been asked. Perhaps, replied Dolokhov, coldly and angry, glancing at Julian, and then scowling, he gave Nikolai just such a look as he had given Pierre at the club banquet. There is something up, thought Nikolai, and his conjecture was confirmed by the fact that immediately after dinner Dolokhov left. He called Natasha to him and asked her what had happened. I was just looking for you, said Natasha, running out to him. I told you, but you wouldn't believe me, she answered triumphantly. He has proposed to Sonia. Little as Sonia had occupied Nikolai's thoughts of late, something seemed to give way with him when he heard this. Dolokhov was a suitable and, in some respects, brilliant match for the dowerless orphan girl. From the point of view of the old countess and of society, it was out of the question for her to refuse him, and therefore Nikolai's first feeling was one of indignation with Sonia. He was about to say, "That's splendid. Of course you must forget Charles' promises and accept him." But before he had time to say it, Natasha went on. "And can you imagine? She refused him. Absolutely refused," said Natasha, adding a brief pause. "She told him she loved another." Yes, my Sonia could not have done otherwise, thought Nikolai. As much as Mamma pleaded with him, she refused, and I know she won't change her mind once she has said. "And Mamma pleaded with him?" said Nikolai reproachfully. "Yes," said Natasha. "Do you know, Nikolai, now don't you be angry, but I know you won't marry her. I know, heaven knows how, but I know for certain you won't marry her." "Well, that's something you can't know," said Nikolai. "But I want to talk to her. What a darling Sonia is," he added with a smile. "Yes, she really is a darling. I'll send her to you." And Natasha kissed her brother and ran off. A minute later, Sonia came in looking frightened, guilty, and distraught. Nikolai went up to her and kissed her hand. This was the first time since his return that they had been alone together and had spoken of their love. "Sophie," he said to her, speaking shyly at first, and then more boldly as he went on, "if you intend to refuse one who is not only a brilliant and advantaged match, but a splendid, noble fellow, and my friend—" Sonia interrupted him. "I have already refused him," she said hurriedly, "and if you are refusing him for my sake, I'm afraid that—" Sonia again interrupted him. She gave him a frightened, beseeching look. "Nicholas, don't say that to me," she said. "But I must. It must be presumptuous of me, but still it's better to say it. If you are refusing him on my account, I must tell you the whole truth. I love you, I believe, more than anyone else." "That is enough for me," said Sonia. "No, but I've been in love 1,000 times, and shall fall in love again, though for no one has such a feeling of friendship, trust, and love as I have for you. Then, I am young. Mamma does not wish it. Well, I simply wanted to say I can make no promises, and I beg you to consider Dolokhov's offer," he said, finding it hard to say his friend's name. "Don't say that to me. I want nothing. I love you as a brother, and shall always love you, and I want nothing more. You are an angel. I am not worthy of you, but I am only afraid of misleading you." And again Nikolai kissed her hand. Chapter 12. Vogel's was the gayest ball in Moscow, said the mammas as they watched their adolescent children executing their newly learned steps. So said the young people themselves as they danced. They were ready to drop. So said the grown-up young men and women who came to these balls in the spirit of condescension and found them most enjoyable. That year 2 marriages had come of these balls. The 2 pretty young princesses, Gorchakov, met suitors there and were married, which further enhanced the fame of these dances. What distinguished these balls from others was the absence of a host and hostess and the presence of the good-natured Volga, flying about like a feather, bowing and scraping according to the rules of his art as he collected the tickets from all his guests, and the fact that only those came who wanted to dance and enjoy themselves. As girls of 13 and 14 do who are wearing long dresses for the first time, all with rare receptions, were pretty, or seemed to be, so rapturous with their smiles, so sparkling their eyes. Sometimes the best pupils, among whom Natasha, who was exceptionally graceful, was the very best, even danced past the pas de Chalel. But at this last ball only the Akasash, the Anglisha, and the mazurka, which was just coming into fashion, were danced. Volja had taken a ballroom in Beskov's house, and the ball, as everyone said, was a great success. There were many pretty girls, and the Rostov girls were among the prettiest. They were both particularly happy and gay that evening. Proud of Dolokhov's proposal, her refusal, and her talk with Nikolai, Sonia had whirled about so that the maid could hardly get their hair braided before she left home, and now was radiant in impetuous joy. Natasha, no less proud of her first long dress and of being a real ball, was even happier. Both girls wore white muslin dresses with pink ribbons. Natasha fell in love the very moment she entered the ballroom. She was not in love with anyone in particular, but in love with everyone. Whomever she happened to look at, she was in love with for the moment. "Oh, how lovely it is," she kept running up to Sonia and saying. Nikolai and Denisov walked about, looking with amiable condescension at the dancers. "How sweet she is! She'll be a real beauty," said Denisov. "Who?" "Countess Natasha," answered Denisov. "And how she dances! What grace!" he added after a pause. "Whom are you talking about?" "Your sister, of course," cried Denisov testedly. Rostov grinned. "Mon cher Compton, you are one of my best pupils. You must dance," said Volja, coming up to Nikolai. "Look at all these attractive young ladies." He turned with the same request to Denisov, who was also a former pupil of his. "Non, mon cher, I prefer to be a wallflower," said Denisov. "Don't you remember how little I profited from your lessons?" "Oh no," Volja hastened to reassure him. "You were only inattentive, but you had talent. Yes, you had talent." The orchestra struck up the newly introduced mazurka. Nikolai could not refuse Volja, and asked Sonia to dance. Denisov sat down by the elderly ladies, and leaning on his saber and beating time with his foot, commenced telling them something amusing and making them laugh, while he watched the young people dance. Volja, with Natasha, his best pupil and his pride, was the first couple, the flight, delicate movements of his little slippered feet. Volja first flew across the hall with Natasha, who shyly but attentively executed her steps. Denisov did not take his eyes off her, and beat time with his saber in a way that clearly showed that if he was not dancing, it was because he did not care to, and not because he could not. In the middle of a figure, he beckoned to Rostov, who was passing. "This is not at all the real thing," he said. "What sort of Polish mazurka is this?" But she dances admirably. Knowing that Denisov has a reputation in Poland for his masterly dancing of the mazurka, Nikolai ran up to Natasha and said, "Go and choose Denisov. He's a real dancer. A wonder." When it was Natasha's turn again, she got up, and tripping rapidly across the floor in her little bow-trimmed dancing slippers, timidly made her way along to the corner where Denisov was sitting. She was aware that everyone was looking at her and waiting. Nikolai saw, and that she and Denisov were smiling, disputing, and that Denisov was refusing, though he grinned with delight. He ran up to them. "Please, Vasily Dmitri," Natasha was saying. "Please do." "Oh no, let me off, Countess," replied Denisov. "I'll sing for you a whole evening," promised Natasha. "This little enchantress can do anything with me," said Denisov, unbuckling his saber. He came out from behind the chairs, firmly clasped his partner's hand, raised his head, and put one foot forward, waiting for the beat. Only on horseback and in the mazurka was Denisov's short stature not noticeable. Only then did he look the dashing fellow he felt himself to be. At the right beat of the music, he glanced sideways at his partner with a playful, triumphant air, suddenly stamped one foot, seeming not to notice the chairs before him. He was dashing straight at them, when all at once, clicking his spur and planting his feet apart, he stopped short on his heels, stood so for a second, stamped both feet with a clanking of spurs, rapidly whirled around, then clicked his left heel against his right, and again flew around a circle. Natasha divined what he was going to do, abandoned herself to him, and scarcely knowing how, followed his lead. First he spun her around by the right, then by the left, fell on one knee, twirled around him, and again springing up dashed forward so impetuously that it seemed as if he would race through all the rooms without taking a breath. Then he suddenly stopped and again performed some new and unexpected step. After dexterously spinning his partner around in front of his chair, he bowed to her with a click of the heels. Natasha did not even make him a courtesy. She gazed at him in bewilderment, smiling as if not recognizing. What was that? She gasped. Although Vogo would not acknowledge to this to be the real berserker, everyone was enchanted in Denisov's skill. He was asked again and again as a partner, and the old man, smiling, began to talk of Poland in the good old days. Denisov flushed after the berserker, and mopping his face with his handkerchief, sat down by Natasha and did not leave her for the rest of the evening. Chapter 13. For the 2 days after the ball, Rostov did not see Dolokhov at his house, nor did he find him at the home when he called. On the third day he received a note from him. As I do not intend to visit your house again, for reasons you know, and am going to rejoin my regiment, I am giving a farewell supper tonight for my friends. Come to the English Hotel. About 10 o'clock, Rostov went to the English Hotel straight from the theater, where he had been with his family in Denisov. He was at once shown in the best room in the hotel, which Dolokhov had taken for the evening. Some 20 men were crowded around a table at which Dolokhov sat between 2 candles. On the table was a pile of gold and paper money, and Dolokhov was keeping the bank. Since Sonia's refusal of his proposal, Rostov had not seen and felt uncomfortable at the thought of meeting him. The moment he entered the room, he was met by Dolokhov's cold, lucid gaze, as if he had been expected. "We haven't seen each other for some time," he said. "Thanks for coming. I'll just finish dealing here, and then Alyosha will come in with his chorus." "I called once or twice at your house," said Rostov, reddening. Dolokhov made no reply. "You might put up a stake," he said. Rostov recalled at the moment a singular conversation he had once had with Dolokhov. "None but fools trust luck in cards," Dolokhov had said then. "Or are you afraid to play with me?" Dolokhov now asked, as if divining Rostov's thought, and he smiled. Behind his smile, Rostov detected the mood he had seen at him in the club banquet at times when, as if bored with everyday life, he had felt a need to escape from it by some strange and for the most part cruel act. Rostov felt ill at ease. He racked his brain, trying to hit on some joke with which to reply to Dolokhov's question. But before he could think of anything, Dolokhov looked at him straight in his face and slowly, deliberately, so that everyone could hear, said to him, "Do you remember, you and I were talking about cards? None but fools trust to luck. In cards one must be certain. I want to try it." "Try the luck or the certainty," Rostov wondered. "But you better not play," Dolokhov added, springing a newly opened pack of cards. "Bank, gentlemen." Moving the money forward, Dolokhov prepared to deal. Rostov sat beside him, and at first did not play. Dolokhov kept glancing at him. "Well, why don't you play?" he asked. And oddly, Nikolai felt impelled to take a card, put a trifling stake on it, and began to play. "I have no money with me," he said. "I'll trust you." Rostov staked 5 rubles in the card and lost, put up another 5 and lost. Dolokhov killed, that is, beaten 10 cards running. "Gentlemen," he said, after dealing several times, "please paste your money on your cards, or I may get muddled in the reckoning." One of the players said that he hoped he might be trusted. "You may be trusted, but I'm afraid of getting muddled. I ask you to please put the money on your cards," replied Dolokhov. "You needn't worry. We'll set up afterward," he added to Rostov. The game continued. A waiter kept bringing champagne. Rostov lost on every card and owed the bank 800 rubles. He had just written 800 rubles on a card, then, while the champagne glass was being filled, changed his mind and was about to write the usual stake of 20 rubles. "Leave it," said Dolokhov, though he did not appear to be looking at Rostov. "You'll win it back all the sooner. I lose to the others and win from you. Or are you afraid of me?" he asked. Rostov complied, let the 800 remain, and laid down a 7 of hearts with a torn corner, which he had picked up from the floor. He well remembered that card afterward. Laying down the 7 of hearts, on which with a broken bit of chalk he had written 800 in clear round figures, he emptied the glass of warm champagne that had been handed to him, smiled at Dolokhov's word, and with a sinking heart watched Dolokhov's hands that held the pack as he waited for the 7 to turn up. A great deal depended on Rostov winning or losing on the 7 of hearts. The preceding Sunday, Count Ilya Andreyitch had given his son 2,000 rubles, and though he had never liked speaking of money difficulties, had told him that this would be the last money he could let him have till May, and asked him to be the more economical this time. Nikolai had told him that it was more than enough, and gave him his word of honor not to ask for more still. Spring. Not only 1,200 rubles was left of that money, ruples, so that 7 of hearts meant not only the loss of 1,600 rubles, but the necessity of going back on his word. With a sinking heart, he watched Dólokhov's hands and thought, "Now quickly, let me have that card, and I'll take my cap and drive home to supper with Denisov, Natasha, and Sonia, and I'll certainly never touch a card again." At that moment, his home life, his jokes with Petya, his talks with Sonia, duets with Natasha, the games of Pickwick with his father, and even his comfortable bed in the house on the Professor Street, rose before him with such vividness and charm that it seemed as if it were all some long-lost and hitherto unappreciated bliss. He could not conceive that an absorbed chance, making the 7 fall to the right rather than to the left, might deprive him of all that newly perceived, newly illuminated happiness, and plunge him into the abyss of some unknown, undefined misery. That could not be, yet it was with dread that he waited for the moment of Dólokhov's hands, those big-boned, reddish hands with hairy wrists visible under the shirt cuffs, laid down the pack card and took up a glass and the pipe that were handed to him. "So you're not afraid to play with me," repeated Dólokhov, and is about to tell his good story, leaned back in his chair and smiling deliberately began to talk. "Yes, gentlemen, I've been told that there's a rumor going around Moscow that I'm a sharper, so I advise you to be on your guard with me." "Deal with you," said Roscoe. "Oh, these Moscow gossips," said Dólokhov, and he took up the cards with a smile. "Ah!" Rostov almost screamed, raising both hands to his head. The 7 he needed was lying uppermost, the first card in the pack. He had lost more than he could pay. "Don't, in any case, ruin yourself," said Dólokhov with a fleeting glance at Rostov as he continued to deal. And leaving off it there, thank you so much for watching and subscribing or just looking at it. Please give it a thumbs up, thumbs down, or leave a comment below. Subscribe. It's the